I knew I was terminated when Tyler called me ma'am with the tone reserved for nuclear waste. 3 decades of dedication now packed into an office box and a deactivated keycard left in front of the elevator. But what he didn't know was that I designed the entire system he just invested $3 million to modernize. The day began like any other at Granite Forge Systems. Madison was experiencing one of those perfect October mornings, crisp air, leaves turning amber and crimson, the kind of day that makes you grateful to be in Wisconsin. I'd arrived early as usual, my thermos of black coffee still warm. My mind already mapping out solutions to the production line glitches we'd encountered yesterday. I didn't notice anything unusual until Shannon from HR appeared at my office door. Shannon never came to engineering. Her territory was the carpeted section of our building, not the industrial floor where code met metal. Evelyn, Mr. Voss would like to see you in the conference room. Her voice carried that carefully neutral tone that HR professionals perfect. But her eyes couldn't hide the pity. Now, I asked, already saving my work. 30 years of corporate life teaches you to read the signs. Yes, please, he's waiting. I remember the walk to the conference room feeling longer than usual. The glass walls that Tyler had installed to promote transparency now seemed cruelly appropriate. Everyone could see whatever was about to happen. Tyler Voss sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone. At 34, he looked like Central Casting's idea of a tech CEO, expensive haircut, designer stubble, a Patagonia vest over a button-down that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He didn't stand when I entered, didn't even look up immediately. Ma'am, he finally said, gesturing to a chair as if granting an audience. That's when I knew. In 6 months as CEO, he'd never called me ma'am before. It was always Evelyn, or, more commonly, he'd avoid addressing me directly altogether. Shannon placed a manila folder on the table. Separation agreement, severance details, non-disclosure forms. We're restructuring the engineering department, Tyler said, his MBA parlance carefully chosen. Moving away from legacy systems toward cloud-native architecture and AI-driven solutions. Translation, you're old, and I want my own people. We appreciate your years of service, he continued. But Granite Forge needs to embrace agile methodologies and bleeding-edge innovation. The board agrees it's time for a fresh perspective. I said nothing, which seemed to unnerve him. Your contributions have been substantial, he added, faltering slightly at my silence. But we need to pivot toward market disruption and vertical integration of our tech stack. More meaningless buzzwords. I'd built the systems that kept this company running while Tyler was still learning to code in a dorm room, but arguing would accomplish nothing. The severance package is generous, Shannon interjected, clearly uncomfortable with my silence. 6 months' salary, extended health benefits, and career transition services. I finally spoke. And my projects? Tyler's expression shifted to something resembling relief. Business territory, not emotions. We're replatforming everything. The Crucible system in particular will be completely overhauled. I've already secured $3 million in funding for the modernization initiative. The Crucible, my brainchild. 7 years of work, countless nights and weekends perfecting a system that could revolutionize how manufacturing, automation responds to real-time data. And Tyler thought he could just overhaul it with a few $1 million and a team of fresh graduates. I see, was all I said. We'll need you to clear out your workspace today. Company policy regarding terminated executives, I'm afraid. His eyes returned to his phone. Dismissal complete. 3 decades, reduced to terminated executive. I signed where Shannon indicated. My signature as steady as it had been on thousands of technical documents over the years. I didn't argue about the NDA or the intellectual property clauses. They wouldn't matter soon enough. Your keycard will deactivate at noon, Shannon explained as she walked me back to my office. Is there someone we can call to help with your things? That won't be necessary, I replied, pulling a cardboard box from my supply closet. 30 years of anticipating needs doesn't stop on termination day. It didn't take long to pack, I'm not one for personal mementos or desk plants. My office was as efficient as my code. The few personal items fit easily into the box: a photo of my late husband, Robert, a small trophy from the Engineers Bowling League, and a worn copy of Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs that had guided my work. Since college, what didn't go into the box was the original Crucible design notebook, which I'd kept in my leather messenger bag for the past year, not company property. I'd purchased the graph paper notebook myself at a small stationery shop in downtown Madison. The property it contained, however, was priceless. Shannon hovered uncertainly as I packed. The company would like to thank you for your discretion during this transition. Translation: don't make a scene. I've never been one for scenes, Shannon, I assured her, closing the box. Please tell Mr. Voss that I wish him luck with Crucible. He's going to need it. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she nodded. Security will escort you to the exit. The security guard was Jimmy, who'd started at Granite Forge when I was already a department head. He looked mortified as he walked alongside me to the elevator. This is wrong, Ms. Brooks, he muttered as we waited. Everyone knows it. I appreciated his sentiment but kept my expression neutral. Change is inevitable in tech, Jimmy. We all face obsolescence eventually. The elevator arrived with a cheerful ding that seemed almost mocking. As we descended, I watched the floor numbers tick down, each one representing a layer of the company I'd helped build, now receding from my life. In the lobby, I handed Jimmy my key card. Take care of yourself, I told him. You too, Ms. Brooks? He hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, that new system, Mr. Voss is always talking about. The guys on the floor say it doesn't hold a candle to your work. I allowed myself a small smile. That's kind of you to say. Outside, the October sunshine felt different on my face. No longer the light of a workday morning, but the illumination of an unexpected freedom. I placed my box in the trunk of my Volvo, a sensible car I'd driven for 8 years, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. I pulled out my phone and made a call I'd prepared for but hoped would never be necessary. Patricia, it's Evelyn Brooks. Yes, that's right. I'm afraid it's time to activate our contingency plan. The Crucible patents. Yes, all 7 of them. They've terminated my position. And they're planning to use my system without attribution or compensation. Patricia Winters had been my patent attorney for 15 years. She specialized in protecting female engineers whose innovations were too often appropriated by employers. I understand, I said in response to her question. No, I don't want to pursue reinstatement. Just the intellectual property claims. Yes, I'll send you the documentation this afternoon. I ended the call and finally started my car. As I drove away from Granite Forge Systems, I didn't look back at the glass and steel building where I'd spent most of my adult life. Instead, I focused on the road ahead, leading to my modest home in the suburbs of Madison, where my garage workshop contained everything I needed for what would come next. The garage had been Robert's domain originally. After he died 5 years ago, I'd gradually transformed it into my own space, half engineering lab, half sanctuary. While the company had refused to fund Crucible's development beyond basic prototype stages, I'd continued the work here using my own resources and time. They'd called it a pet project, impractical, too ambitious, not aligned with quarterly targets. I parked in the driveway and carried my box inside, setting it on the kitchen counter. The house was quiet, afternoon light filtering through the curtains Robert's mother had made for us as a housewarming gift 20 years ago. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, allowing myself the luxury of stillness. Then I pulled out my phone again and opened my email. There it was, the termination confirmation, effective immediately, with attached documents about continuing health insurance and collecting personal items left behind standard corporate procedure. What wasn't standard was my response. I opened a pre-drafted email to myself with 7 attachments, PDFs of the patent confirmations for every aspect of the Crucible system, all registered solely in my name. through Patricia's careful legal maneuvering. Contrary to what Granite Forge believed, I hadn't developed Crucible on company time or with company resources, at least. Not the parts that mattered. The core innovations, the proprietary language that made the system self-correcting. The adaptive algorithms that could predict and prevent manufacturing defects before they occurred. All of it had been created right here in my garage, on my own equipment. During evenings and weekends, the company had seen only the surface implementation, the parts I'd been willing to share. They had no idea of the system's true capabilities or its underlying architecture. And now Tyler Voss had committed $3 million to modernize something he fundamentally didn't understand. I forwarded the patents to Patricia, then sent one more email to Martin Hayes, Granite Forge's VP of Operations and the only executive who had ever taken my work seriously. Not a detailed explanation, just a brief note. Martin, I'm sorry to leave so abruptly. If problems arise with Crucible in the coming weeks, you should know that I'm still reachable. For now. Then I closed my laptop and went to the garage, my sanctuary, my arsenal. The next 3 weeks passed quietly. I received my severance package. I tended to my garden, caught up on reading, and took long walks around the neighborhood. To anyone watching, I appeared to be adjusting to retirement, perhaps mourning my career a bit. But moving forward, in reality, I was waiting and monitoring. You see, the beauty of Crucible wasn't just in its innovative approach to manufacturing automation. Its true genius lay in its security protocols. I'd designed the system with a hidden administrator account, not accessible through normal means, not visible in any documentation. This account allowed me to monitor system performance remotely, through an encrypted connection that appeared as routine data traffic to any observer. From my garage workstation, I watched as Tyler's team began implementing their modernization plan. They were making the exact mistakes I'd anticipated, trying to layer new code over my architecture, without understanding the foundational logic, attempting to bypass security features they saw as outdated, introducing incompatible libraries and frameworks that conflicted with Crucible's core functionality. It was like watching someone try to renovate a house by painting over the electrical outlets and then wondering why nothing worked. On day 23 after my termination, I received an invitation that made me smile. Tyler Voss was hosting a company-wide town hall to unveil the future of Granite Forge Crucible 2. And remarkably, former employees were welcome to attend as a celebration of the company's heritage while embracing its future. Translation: Tyler wanted an audience of faces who would recognize how thoroughly he was erasing the past. I RSVP'd immediately. The town hall was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 3 p.m. I chose my outfit carefully that morning, a charcoal gray suit I'd worn to countless executive meetings, paired with a deep blue blouse that Robert had always said brought out my eyes. Professional, understated, forgettable to someone like Tyler who valued flash over substance. I arrived 15 minutes early and signed in at the reception desk. The young woman checking names didn't recognize me, which wasn't surprising. In the corporate world, out of sight quickly becomes out of mind. The auditorium was transformed. Production equipment had been moved to create a stage-like area. Professional lighting had been brought in, along with a massive screen for presentations. Clearly, no expense had been spared for Tyler's big moment. I took a seat near the back, nodding politely to the few former colleagues who recognized me. Some seemed surprised to see me there, others embarrassed. Most simply nodded back with that particular corporate blend of acknowledgement and avoidance. At precisely 3 p.m., the lights dimmed, and a soundtrack of what I can only describe as inspirational tech music began playing. Synthesizers and driving beats that were supposed to evoke innovation and disruption. The screen came to life with the Granite Forge logo, reimagined with sleeker lines and a color gradient that transitioned from industrial gray to digital blue. And then Tyler Voss strode onto the stage, wearing a black turtleneck and jeans in what I assumed was his homage to Steve Jobs. The crowd applauded dutifully. "Thank you for being here today," he began, his voice amplified by a wireless microphone. This is a pivotal moment for Granite Forge Systems. For 30 years, this company has been a reliable manufacturer of industrial components. Today, we begin our transformation into a technology leader. More dutiful applause. When I took the helm 6 months ago, I promised the board that we would revolutionize our approach to manufacturing. No more clunky systems built on outdated architecture. No more resistance to cloud integration and machine learning. No more operating like it's still 1995. On the screen behind him, a slide appeared showing the old engineering department, my department. The image had been desaturated, making everything appear drab and outdated. And there I was, captured in profile, explaining something to a colleague at a whiteboard. The photo had been taken about 2 years ago, but the editing made it look like a relic from another era. This was Granite Forge, Tyler continued, gesturing to the image. Dedicated people working with the tools they had. But today's manufacturing landscape demands more than dedication. It demands innovation, agility, a willingness to break free from old-fashioned thinking. The next slide showed Tyler's new team, young, diverse, casually dressed, gathered around a table covered with laptops and tablets. The image was vibrant, everyone smiling, the lighting bright and optimistic. This is Granite Forge 2.0, a team of forward thinkers who aren't bound by "we've always done it this way" mentalities. And together, we've accomplished in 6 weeks what couldn't be done in 6 years under the old system. I felt a flicker of anger at that blatant lie, but kept my expression neutral. Around me, current employees nodded enthusiastically while former team members shifted uncomfortably in their iPod seats. Today, I'm proud to announce that Crucible 2.0 is ready for implementation. What was once a cumbersome, locally bound system has been transformed into a cloud-native, AI-driven platform that will revolutionize our production capabilities. The screen changed to show a sleek dashboard interface, remarkably similar to my original design, but with more animations and a darker color scheme that I suppose was meant to look more tech. Crucible 2. Error is yours. Azure 00 will reduce production errors by 87%, increase throughput by 42%, and provide predictive maintenance that will save us millions in downtime costs, all while being more user-friendly and requiring less specialized knowledge to operate. As Tyler continued his presentation, diving into what he called the technical architecture, but was really just a collection of buzzwords and oversimplified diagrams, I noticed Martin Hayes sitting in the front row. Unlike the other executives who were nodding along with Tyler's every claim, Martin looked concerned. He'd been at Granite Forge for 25 years and understood the manufacturing process better than anyone. He knew that implementations weren't as simple as Tyler was making them sound. "We begin the rollout tomorrow," Tyler announced triumphantly. "By this time next month, every production line will be operating under Crucible 2.0, and Granite Forge will have completed its digital transformation." The crowd applauded as Tyler took a theatrical bow. "Now, I'd be happy to take a few questions," he said, the magnanimity in his voice suggesting he was granting a rare privilege. Several hands went up. Tyler pointed to a young woman in the middle of the audience. "What happens to the existing production data during the transition?" she asked. "Excellent question," Tyler replied, though his expression suggested he thought it was anything but. "We've developed a seamless migration protocol that will transfer all critical data to the new system. Nothing important will be lost." This was another lie. My version of Crucible used a proprietary data structure that couldn't be easily mapped to standard formats without deep understanding of the underlying architecture. Any migration would lose critical contextual metadata that the system relied upon. Another hand went up, an older engineer named Dave, who'd worked alongside me for nearly 2 decades. "The original Crucible used a specialized command language for real-time adjustments," Dave said. "Has that been preserved or replaced in the new version?" I could see Tyler's smile tighten. He hadn't expected technical questions from the audience. "We've implemented a more standardized command structure using Python and JavaScript," he replied. "Much more accessible to our entire engineering team. Not just specialists familiar with the old proprietary language." Dave frowned, but didn't follow up. He knew, as I did, that the specialized language had been a feature, not a limitation. It had been designed specifically for real-time manufacturing controls, with fail-safes and redundancies that general-purpose languages couldn't easily replicate. Martin Hayes raised his hand next. Tyler hesitated before acknowledging him. Have we thoroughly tested Crucible 2? 010 with all our existing equipment configurations? Martin asked. Some of our production lines have unique requirements that were custom programmed into the original system. Absolutely, Tyler said quickly. We've run extensive simulations across all possible scenarios. The new system is more adaptive, more flexible. It will handle edge cases better than the original ever could. I had to suppress a laugh at that. The original Crucible had been built around those edge cases, designed to handle the unexpected because in manufacturing, the unexpected was inevitable. No simulation could account for all the variables of a live production environment. A few more softball questions followed, mostly from Tyler's new team members, clearly designed to highlight features they were proud of developing. Then Tyler wrapped up the session with another round of self-congratulation and an invitation to a reception in the lobby with champagne and catered appetizers. As the crowd began to disperse, I remained seated, watching Tyler accept congratulations from board members and his direct reports. His expression was triumphant, like a general who'd won a decisive victory. If only he knew the battle hadn't even begun. I was about to leave when Martin Hayes approached my row. He looked tired. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from trying to prevent a disaster no one else can see. Coming. Evelyn, he said, taking the seat next to me. I'm glad you came. Wouldn't have missed it, I replied. Quite a production. Martin glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. Tell me honestly, is this going to work? I appreciated that he came directly to the point. It was why we'd always worked well together. No, I said simply. It's going to fail catastrophically. He nodded slowly, as if I'd merely confirmed what he already suspected. That's what I thought. The demo they showed me last week had serious flaws. But Tyler insisted they'd be fixed before implementation. The flaws are fundamental, Martin. They're trying to replace the engine while keeping the car running. What can I do? He asked. And I heard the genuine concern in his voice, not just for his position or the company, but for the employees whose livelihoods depended on those production lines running smoothly. Back up everything, I advised. Make sure you have contingency plans for when the lines go down. And keep my number handy. Martin studied my face. You knew this would happen. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I designed Crucible to be adaptable, but secure. What I didn't design it to be was dismantled by people who don't understand it. Tyler says you were resistant to modernization, that you refused to consider cloud integration or updating the codebase. I smiled thinly. Tyler says a lot of things. Martin seemed to weigh his next words carefully. Would you consider coming back, as a consultant, if not an employee? We could really use your expertise during this transition. I don't think Tyler would approve that expense, I replied. Tyler isn't the only one with influence at Granite Forge, Martin said. The board respects results, and if this implementation goes as badly as you predict. I stood up, gathering my purse. Let's see how it plays out, shall we? My phone number hasn't changed. As I turned to leave, Martin asked one more question. Did you ever document the complete Crucible architecture? The team says they can't find comprehensive technical specifications. They won't find what doesn't exist, I said. At least, not at Granite Forge. I left him with that thought and made my way toward the exit, intentionally bypassing the reception area. I'd seen enough celebration of my life's work being dismantled. But as I neared the doors, a voice called out, Ms. Brooks! I turned to see Shannon from HR hurrying toward me, looking uncomfortable in a dress that was clearly reserved for special occasions. I just wanted to say it was nice to see you, she said when she caught up. Are you doing well? Very well, thank you, I replied. She lowered her voice. Several people in engineering have left since the restructuring. The new team is having some challenges with the systems you built. I imagine they are. If you ever wanted to discuss coming back, I'm sure arrangements could be made. Perhaps in an advisory capacity? So it had already begun. The realization that replacing 3 decades of specialized knowledge wasn't as simple as Tyler had promised the board. That's kind of you, Shannon, but I'm quite content with my current situation. Please enjoy the reception. I smiled and continued toward the exit. As I walked to my car, I felt no satisfaction in knowing that Granite Forge was heading for trouble. These were people's livelihoods at stake, after all. But some lessons can only be learned through consequence. And Tyler Voss had been determined to learn this one the hard way. The next morning, I was in my garage workstation by 6 a.m., monitoring the Crucible implementation through my administrator portal. The initial stages looked exactly as I'd expected. Tyler's team was forcing the new interface elements onto the original framework without proper integration protocols. It was like watching someone try to attach the facade of a modern building onto a Victorian foundation without checking if the structures were compatible. By noon, the first problems appeared. Production Line 3, which manufactured precision components for aerospace clients, began reporting synchronization errors. The new command protocols were sending conflicting instructions to the robotic assembly units. I watched as Tyler's team implemented their prepared fix, essentially forcing the commands through. By overriding the error messages, a catastrophically bad decision that might work temporarily but would eventually lead to compounding errors as the system tried to reconcile the conflicting data. By 3 p.m., 3 more production lines were showing warning signs. The dashboard that had looked so impressive in Tyler's presentation was now displaying a constellation of yellow and red alerts that his team was frantically trying to resolve. At 4:30, my phone rang. Martin Hayes. "It's not going well," he said without preamble. "I'm aware," I replied. A pause. "How are you aware, Evelyn?" "Let's just say I built in ways to monitor system health." Another pause, longer this time. "I see. Then you know we've had to shut down 4 production lines." Tyler's team is saying it's just integration friction and will resolve within 24 hours. "It won't," I said simply. "That's my assessment as well." Martin sounded tired. "The board is concerned. We have deliverables due next week for Lockton Aerospace. Very tight tolerances that only Line 3 can handle. And Line 3 is down. Completely non-responsive. The engineers can't even get the diagnostic tools to connect." I knew why. Line 3 had the most sophisticated security protocols because of the classified nature of some aerospace components. The system was designed to lock down completely if it detected unauthorized access attempts or command structures it couldn't verify. "What does Tyler say?" I asked. "That it's normal growing pains, that Amazon and Google have outages too. That revolution isn't without sacrifice." Martin's tone made it clear what he thought of these explanations. "And the board?" They gave him 48 hours to resolve the critical issues before they'll consider other options. I considered my position carefully. I wanted Tyler to face the consequences of his arrogance, but I didn't want to see Granite Forge itself damaged beyond repair. Too many good people depended on the company. "I'll make you an offer, Martin. If things aren't resolved by tomorrow afternoon, call me back. I may be able to help, but only under specific conditions." "What conditions?" he asked immediately. "We'll discuss that if it becomes necessary. For now, let Tyler try to fix his mess." After we hung up, I returned to my monitoring station and watched as the situation at Granite Forge deteriorated. Further, by evening, all production had been halted as cascading errors spread through the system. Tyler's team was implementing increasingly desperate measures, each one making the situation worse as they corrupted more of the underlying architecture. I slept poorly that night, my dreams filled with flashing red warnings and the sound of factory machinery grinding to a halt. Despite everything, I still cared about Granite Forge. I'd helped build it from a small regional manufacturer into an industry leader. Its failure would hurt far more people than just Tyler Voss. My phone rang at 6:42 a.m. Martin again. "We need you," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The entire system is down. Nothing is responding. Tyler's team has been working all night with no progress." I took a deep breath. My conditions, Martin. First, I work independently, not under Tyler or anyone else. I report directly to the board. Done. Second, I require a consulting fee of $20,000 per day, with a minimum engagement of 5 days. A slight hesitation. I'll have to get board approval for that amount, but given the circumstances, I think they'll agree. Third, and most importantly, I want a public acknowledgement that Crucible was my design, and that the intellectual property rights belong to me personally, not to Granite Forge Systems. This time the silence was longer. That complicates things. Evelyn, our legal team has always maintained that work done by employees belongs to the company. Check the patent office records, Martin. All 7 patents for Crucible's core systems are registered in my name. I developed the critical components on my own time, with my own resources. Granite Forge only implemented what I chose to share with you. Another long pause. I'll need to discuss this with the board. Can you at least come in and assess the situation while we sort out the legal details? No, those are my conditions. The board has my number when they're ready to agree. I ended the call and made myself breakfast. Toast with homemade blackberry jam from berries I'd grown in my garden. The simple ritual calmed me. I was taking a risk by revealing my hand so explicitly, but the time for subtlety had passed. My phone rang again at 9:17 a.m. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. "Evelyn Brooks," I answered. "Ms. Brooks, this is Lawrence Chen, chairman of the Granite Forge Board of Directors." His voice was clipped, authoritative. "Martin Hayes has briefed me on your conversation. I'd like to discuss the situation further." "Good morning, Mr. Chen. What would you like to discuss?" "Martin tells me you believe you can resolve our current technical difficulties. But you've set some rather unusual conditions." "There's nothing unusual about proper compensation and credit for intellectual property," I replied calmly. "Our legal department informs me that all work developed during your employment falls under the company's intellectual property agreements. Your legal department is mistaken. The critical components of Crucible were developed independently, on my own time and with my own resources. The patents are registered solely in my name. I'd be happy to have my attorney provide documentation." A pause. "Even if what you say is true, this approach seems unnecessarily adversarial. Ms. Brooks, you were a valued member of the Granite Forge family for many years." "Until I wasn't," I said simply. "Until I was called old-fashioned and dismissed without the courtesy of a transition plan for systems I'd built over decades." Another pause. "I understand there may have been mishandling of your departure. That's regrettable. But right now, we have a crisis that's costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars every hour production." Remains halted. "I'm aware of the stakes, Mr. Chen. My conditions remain the same." I heard him sigh. "Very well. The board has authorized me to agree to your consulting fee. As for the intellectual property acknowledgement, we can issue a statement recognizing your significant contributions to the Crucible system." "Not contributions, Mr. Chen, ownership. Full and exclusive ownership of the patents and the underlying technology." "That's a more complex legal question that will require—" "It's not complex at all," I interrupted. "Check the patent records, contact your attorney, then call me back when you're ready to acknowledge reality." I ended the call before he could respond. Perhaps it was petty to enjoy the momentary power reversal, but after decades of having my expertise questioned and my innovations credited to the company, rather than to me personally, it felt like a small but significant victory. It took another 3 hours and 2 more calls, one from the company's lead counsel and another from Lawrence Chen, before they finally agreed to my terms. A formal statement would be issued acknowledging my ownership of the Crucible patents, along with a licensing agreement allowing Granite Forge to use the technology in exchange for appropriate royalties The specifics would be worked out later, but the principle was established. By 1 p.m., I was walking through the front doors of Granite Forge Systems, not as a terminated employee, but as an independent consultant with leverage that no one could ignore. The receptionist, who had clearly been instructed to expect me, handed me a visitor badge and directed me to the main conference room where the crisis team was assembled. As I walked through the familiar hallways, I noticed employees watching me with expressions ranging from curiosity to hope. Word had clearly spread that I'd been called in to save the day. The scene in the conference room was one of barely contained chaos. Laptops and tablets covered every surface. Whiteboards were filled with diagrams and code snippets. Empty coffee cups and energy drink cans testified to a long night of failed solutions. Tyler Voss was standing at the head of the table, his designer stubble now looking less fashionable and more like simple neglect. His Patagonia vest replaced by a rumpled dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He was mid-sentence when I entered, and the words died in his throat as he saw me. Martin Hayes stood immediately. "Thank you for coming, Evelyn. We're grateful for your assistance." I nodded acknowledgement but kept my eyes on Tyler, whose expression had transitioned from surprise to something like resentment. "Ms. Brooks," he said finally, his tone careful, "we appreciate you consulting on this temporary setback." "From what I understand, it's more than a setback," I replied. "All production lines are down, diagnostic systems are non-responsive, and manual overrides have been rejected by the security protocols." One of Tyler's new team members, a young woman with purple-streaked hair, spoke up. "We've tried bypassing the security layers, but every attempt triggers more lockdowns. It's like the system is actively fighting against us." "It is," I confirmed. "Crucible was designed with military-grade security protocols. Each unauthorized access attempt is logged and triggers incrementally stronger countermeasures. That's absurdly over-engineered for a manufacturing system." Tyler objected. "Is it?" I asked mildly. "Granite Forge produces components for defense contractors, aerospace applications, and critical infrastructure. A security breach could have national security implications. The Department of Defense certainly didn't think it was over-engineered when they commissioned the protocol." That silenced him temporarily. I set down my bag and addressed the room. "I'll need access to a secure workstation and complete administrator credentials. Everyone else should step back from the system for now. Further attempts to force access will only make recovery more difficult." "We can't just," Tyler began. "Those are my conditions," I interrupted. "The board has agreed. Unless you'd prefer to explain to your investors why production remains halted?" Martin intervened smoothly. "We've prepared a workstation for you in the executive conference room. Complete privacy and all the access you need." I nodded and followed him out, aware of Tyler's glare burning into my back as I left. In the hallway, Martin spoke quietly. "He's been up all night trying to fix this. The board is losing confidence quickly." "As they should," I replied. "He dismantled a system he didn't understand and replaced it with a facade that looks impressive, but lacks the underlying architecture to function." "How bad is it really?" Martin asked as we approached the executive conference room. "Imagine replacing the engine in your car with a photograph of an engine, then wondering why it won't start." The executive conference room had been transformed into a makeshift command center. A high-performance workstation was set up at the main table, with multiple monitors showing various system diagnostics, all displaying critical failures. "Will you be able to fix it?" Martin asked once we were alone. "Yes," I said simply, "but not quickly and not without consequences. The system will need to be rebuilt properly, which will take time." "What about the immediate production issues? We have contracts with penalties for delays." "I can implement an emergency recovery protocol that will restore basic functionality within a few hours, but it will be limited, nowhere near the full capabilities of the original system." Martin nodded. "That's better than nothing. I'll inform the board and our key clients." "How soon can you start?" "I've already started," I said, my fingers moving across the keyboard. "The first step is to halt all the override attempts from Tyler's team. They're just making things worse. I began the process of accessing Crucible through the back door I'd built, a hidden administrator channel that would bypass the increasingly aggressive security measures that had been triggered by the failed implementation. Martin watched for a few moments, then quietly left me to my work. The room was silent except for the sound of my typing and the occasional alert from the system as I navigated through layers of security protocols and damage assessment routines. What I found was worse than I'd expected. Tyler's team hadn't just attempted to build a new interface on top of my architecture, they'd actively tried to dismantle core components they didn't understand, replacing them with standardized libraries that were fundamentally incompatible with Crucible's design philosophy. It was like watching someone try to replace a nuclear reactor's cooling system with a garden hose, because they thought the original design was unnecessarily complex. The damage was extensive, but not irreparable. My backdoor access allowed me to freeze the system in its current state, preventing further degradation while I implemented the emergency recovery protocol. This wasn't a fix. It was a controlled restart that would return the system to a minimally functional state while isolating the corrupted components. 3 hours into the process, there was a knock at the door. I didn't look up. "Come in." It was Tyler, alone this time, his expression a carefully composed mask of professional concern. "Ms. Brooks, I wanted to check on your progress." "It's proceeding," I replied without taking my eyes off the screen. The emergency protocol should have production lines 2 and 5 operational within the hour. The others will take longer. He moved closer, trying to see what I was doing. "My team could assist if you'd share your approach. Your team has done quite enough already." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't regret them. Tyler was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone was different, less the confident CEO, more the ambitious young executive facing a career-threatening crisis. "Look, I understand there may be some resentment about how your departure was handled." I finally looked up at him. "This isn't about resentment, Mr. Voss. This is about respect for the systems that keep this company running, for the expertise required to maintain them, and for the intellectual property that you attempted to appropriate." "Appropriate? That's hardly." "The board has already acknowledged my ownership of the Crucible patents," I interrupted. "They've agreed to a proper licensing arrangement moving forward. So yes, appropriate is exactly the right word." His expression shifted, the mask of concern falling away to reveal something closer to anger. "You're holding the company hostage." "No," I corrected him calmly. "I'm protecting my intellectual property while helping the company recover from a crisis of your Sitayin making. There's a difference. We could challenge those patents. The work was done while you were employed here." "You could try," I agreed, "but the documentation is quite clear. I developed the core systems on my own time, with my own resources. The patents are registered solely in my name, through a law firm that specializes in protecting engineers from exactly this type of corporate overreach. Do you really want to add a protracted legal battle to your current problems?" He didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he changed tack. "The board may have agreed to your terms under duress, but once production is restored, that agreement will be revisited." I smiled thinly. "Perhaps. But by then, the statement acknowledging my ownership will have been issued publicly. And more importantly, everyone will understand that Crucible cannot function without me. That gives me considerable leverage, wouldn't you say?" Tyler's jaw tightened. "This approach won't earn you any allies at Granite Forge." "I don't need allies, Mr. Voss. I need recognition and fair compensation for my work. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a system to salvage." He left without another word, the door closing perhaps a bit more forcefully than necessary behind him. I returned my attention to the monitors, but allowed myself a small moment of satisfaction. For the first time since my termination, I felt fully in control of my professional legacy. By evening, I'd managed to restore basic functionality to 4 of the 6 production lines. Not enough for full operations, but sufficient to handle the most critical orders and avoid contract penalties. Martin brought me dinner, a sandwich from the local deli that had been my favorite lunch spot. During my years at Granite Forge, the board is pleased with the progress, he said as I ate. They've drafted the statement about your ownership of the patents. Would you like to review it? I wiped my hands and took the tablet he offered. The statement was concise but comprehensive, acknowledging that I was the sole inventor and patent holder for the Crucible System's core technologies, and that Granite Forge would be entering into a formal licensing agreement for their continued use. This is acceptable, I said, returning the tablet. When will it be released? Tomorrow morning, press release, company website, and investor communications. I nodded and returned to my sandwich. Tyler isn't happy, Martin added after a moment. I wouldn't expect him to be. He's telling the board this could have been resolved without conceding to your demands. I smiled slightly. And what does the board think? That results speak louder than hypotheticals. 4 production lines running when his team couldn't get even one operational? That's difficult too. Argue with. I finished my sandwich and turned back to the workstation. I should be able to get the remaining lines functioning by tomorrow afternoon. But the system will need a complete rebuild if you want to restore full capabilities. How long would that take? 3 weeks, minimum. Possibly longer, depending on how much damage has been done to the underlying architecture. Martin nodded slowly. And you would oversee this rebuild? At my consulting rate, yes. Though I'd recommend bringing in a team that I would select and supervise. The work is too extensive for one person, even me. I'll present that to the board. For now, focus on getting those last 2 lines operational. Lockton Aerospace is breathing down our necks about their order. After Martin left, I continued working well into the night. The quiet of the empty building was familiar. I'd spent countless late evenings here over the years, solving problems while most of my colleagues had gone home to their families. After Robert died, these late nights had become even more frequent. The complex challenges of Crucible filling the void that his absence had left in my life. By 2 a.m., I had all 6 production lines in a stable, if limited, operational state. I sent a status update to Martin and finally headed home for a few hours of sleep. As I drove through the deserted streets of Madison, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, satisfaction at having proven my value so definitively, lingering anger at how I'd been dismissed, and a strange sadness for what might have been if Granite Forge had recognized the true worth of what I'd created. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. I worked long hours at Granite Forge, gradually restoring more functionality to the Crucible system while documenting the extent of the damage caused by Tyler's implementation attempt. The statement about my ownership of the patents was released as promised, causing a minor stir in industry publications and a noticeable dip in Granite Forge's stock price. As investors questioned the company's intellectual property position, Tyler maintained a cold distance, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary and always with a barely concealed hostility. His team of young engineers was more pragmatic. Several of them began seeking me out for guidance, recognizing that their initial dismissal of my old-fashioned approach had been misguided. On the 4th day, I presented my complete assessment to the board of directors. The conference room was tense as I explained in clear, non-technical terms exactly what had happened and what would be required to restore Crucible to full functionality. In essence, I concluded, the attempt to modernize Crucible without understanding its fundamental architecture was like trying to translate a poem without knowing the language. You might recognize some words, but you'll lose the meaning, the rhythm, and ultimately, the function. Lawrence Chen leaned forward. And your proposed solution? A complete rebuild. Preserving the core patents and architecture while implementing a properly integrated modern interface. Not a facade, but a true evolution of the system that respects its underlying design principles. At what cost? Asked another board member. Approximately $600,000 in consulting fees and new development costs. Plus the ongoing licensing fees for my patents, of course. I saw Tyler shift uncomfortably in his seat. This was significantly less than the $3 million he'd secured for his failed modernization attempt. And the timeline? Chen pressed. 4 weeks to restore full functionality. Another 2 for comprehensive testing and documentation. That seems optimistic, Tyler interjected. My team estimated months for a proper rebuild. I turned to him with a polite smile. Your team didn't design the system. Mr. Voss, I did. I know exactly what needs to be done because I built it from the ground up. Chen exchanged glances with the other board members. Ms. Brooks, could we ask you to step outside while we discuss this matter privately? I nodded and gathered my materials. As I left the room, I caught a glimpse of Tyler's expression, a mixture of resentment and resignation that told me he knew which way the decision would go. In the hallway, I found Martin waiting. How did it go? He asked. About as expected. They're discussing it now. Tyler's position is weakening by the hour. 2 major clients called this morning asking specifically about the patent situation. They're concerned about continuity of operations. I wasn't surprised. In manufacturing, especially for defense and aerospace clients, stability and reliability were paramount. The revelation that a key system was under disputed ownership would set off alarm bells for any procurement officer. We waited in silence for nearly 20 minutes before Chen's assistant appeared to call us back in. Tyler was still there, his posture rigid and his expression carefully neutral. Ms. Brooks, Chen began once we were seated. The board has decided to accept your proposal for rebuilding the Crucible system under your direct supervision. We'll have our legal team draft a formal consulting agreement and licensing terms for your patents. I nodded acknowledgement. Thank you. I believe that's the wisest course for all concerned. There is one additional matter, Chen continued. In light of recent events, we've decided that a change in technical leadership is appropriate at this time. Mr. Voss will be transitioning to a different role within the organization, focusing on strategic partnerships rather than internal operations. In corporate speak, this was the equivalent of being sent to Siberia. Tyler's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Martin Hayes will assume interim responsibility for technical operations. Chen added, he'll be your primary point of contact for the Crucible rebuild. That's acceptable, I said, glancing at Martin, who gave me a slight nod. Then I believe we're concluded for now. Our legal team will contact you tomorrow with the draft agreements. As the meeting broke up, Tyler was the first to leave, not meeting anyone's eyes as he exited. The other board members filtered out until only Chen, Martin, and I remained. Off the record, Ms. Brooks, Chen said quietly, this situation has been instructive for the board. We perhaps place too much emphasis on new methodologies and not enough on institutional knowledge. A common mistake in tech, I replied. The fundamentals matter, regardless of how shiny the interface might be. He nodded thoughtfully. We'd like to avoid similar misunderstandings in the future. Once Crucible is stabilized, would you consider a more permanent arrangement with Granite Forge, not as an employee, necessarily, but as a technical advisor with a formal role in evaluating major system changes? The offer was unexpected, but not unwelcome. I'd be open to discussing such an arrangement under the right conditions. Excellent. Martin will coordinate with you on the details. Chen extended his hand, which I shook firmly. Thank you for your candor today. After he left, Martin let out a long breath. Well, that's Tyler effectively sidelined. Strategic partnerships means he'll be flying to conferences and taking clients to dinner, far away from any actual decision-making. A face for the investors, I suggested. Exactly, until his contract runs out next year, at which point I suspect it won't be renewed. Martin gave me a considering look. You know, you could have demanded his termination as part of your conditions. I could have. I agreed. But that would have been personal. This is about the technology and proper recognition. Tyler's fate was always going to be determined by his own actions. Still, it must feel satisfying. I allowed myself a small smile. I won't pretend it doesn't have a certain poetic justice. The next week was intense but productive. I assembled a small team of engineers, some from Granite Forge, others brought in as consultants, who understood and respected Crucible's architecture. Together, we began the meticulous process of rebuilding the system, preserving its core strengths while selectively modernizing elements that could genuinely benefit from new approaches. Tyler appeared occasionally, ostensibly to maintain continuity, but really to monitor our progress and report back to whatever allies he still had on the board. His new role had clearly wounded his pride, and he made little effort to hide his resentment. On the 9th day of the rebuild, he cornered me in the break room while I was getting coffee. "Enjoying your victory lap?" he asked, his tone just short of openly hostile. "I'm enjoying doing the work properly," I replied calmly, stirring cream into my coffee. "It's not about winning or losing, Mr. Voss, isn't it? You've managed to leverage a technical glitch into a lucrative consulting contract and a licensing agreement that will pay you royalties for years. Seems like winning to me." I regarded him steadily. "A technical glitch that shut down the entire production facility and threatened contracts worth millions. A technical glitch that your team created by dismantling a system they didn't understand. After pushing out the one person who could have prevented it." His expression darkened. "You're enjoying this, watching me get demoted, taking over my project." "It was never your project," I corrected him. "That's what you failed to understand. Crucible was mine from the beginning. My design, my architecture, my patents. You just didn't bother to check before you tried to replace me. The board was behind me 100% until this happened. The board was behind your promises of modernization and increased efficiency. When those promises proved empty, their support naturally shifted." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This isn't over. I still have connections in this industry. I can make sure everyone knows you're difficult to work with. That you held a company hostage over a technicality." I smiled slightly. "You could try that approach. Or you could learn from this experience and recognize that genuine expertise has value, regardless of whether it comes packaged in a young, buzzword-fluent MBA, a middle-aged engineer who prefers substance over style." Before he could respond, Martin entered the break room. "Ah, there you are, Evelyn. The team is ready for the architecture review whenever you're finished with your coffee." Tyler stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Don't let me keep you from your important work," he said with a thin smile before turning and walking out. Martin watched him go. "He's not taking it well." "Few people do when their assumptions are challenged so fundamentally," I replied. He built his career on the idea that newer always means better. That experience can be replaced with enthusiasm. It's difficult to accept when reality proves otherwise. "The board is impressed with your progress," Martin said, changing the subject. Chen mentioned that several of them will be stopping by next week to see the rebuild firsthand. "We'll be ready," I assured him. "The core architecture is already stabilized. We're implementing the new interface elements now, but properly integrated this time." As we walked back to the engineering floor, Martin asked, "Have you thought more about Chen's offer, the technical advisor role?" "I have," I admitted. "It has potential, but I'd want clearly defined authority. No advisory position where my recommendations can be ignored when convenient. I think that can be arranged. After this fiasco, I doubt anyone will be eager to bypass your expertise again." The rebuild continued smoothly over the following weeks. True to my estimate, we had the system fully operational within 4 weeks. With comprehensive testing completed by the end of the 6th week, the result was everything I'd originally envisioned for Crucible: powerful, flexible, secure, but now with a properly integrated modern interface that made its capabilities more accessible, without compromising its underlying strength. Throughout this period, Tyler became increasingly marginalized. His new role kept him away from the technical operations, and the success of our rebuild only highlighted the failure of his approach. I heard from Martin that he'd begun interviewing with other companies, likely sensing that his future at Granite Forge was limited. I felt no particular satisfaction in his downfall. He was just one in a long line of executives I'd seen come and go, each convinced they had all the answers, each eventually confronted with the limitations of their understanding. The technology world was full of Tyler Vosses, and most learned eventually that substance matters more than style. Those who didn't learn usually found themselves moving from company to company, leaving messes for others to clean up. On the final day of the project, after the last tests had been successfully completed and the documentation had been delivered, Lawrence Chen hosted a small celebration in the executive dining room. Just the rebuild team, keyboard members, and senior management. To Crucible 3.0, Chen toasted, raising his glass. And to Evelyn Brooks, whose vision made it possible. I accepted the acknowledgement with a nod, feeling a quiet pride in what we'd accomplished. Not just the technical rebuild, but a shift in how my contributions were recognized. After the celebration, Martin walked me to my car. The autumn evening was cool, the sun setting earlier now as we moved toward winter. So, it's official, he said. The board approved your technical advisor contract this morning. Director of Architecture Innovation, with final approval rights on all major system changes. That title seems unnecessarily grandiose, I observed. Martin laughed. Chen insisted, said it needed to reflect your actual authority. And Tyler? Submitted his resignation yesterday, accepted a position with a startup in Boston. We'll announce it next week. I nodded, feeling neither victory nor regret, just the satisfaction of things set right. What will you do now? Martin asked. Before you start the new position? I have a garden that needs attention before winter sets in, I said. And a book I've been meaning to write about adaptive manufacturing systems. Maybe I'll finally start it. No wild celebration of your vindication? He teased. That's not really my style, I replied with a small smile. Besides, the best vindication is seeing Crucible running as it was meant to. And the licensing fees, Martin added. Those two, I acknowledged. Though I'm donating a portion to scholarships for women in engineering, seems fitting. We reached my car, and Martin extended his hand. It's good to have you back, Evelyn. Even in this new capacity, I shook his hand warmly. It's good to be properly valued, Martin. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the journey of the past 2 months. From terminated executive to independent consultant to patent holder with a lucrative licensing agreement and a new position created specifically to leverage my expertise. Not the path I would have chosen, but perhaps the one that was necessary. My house was quiet when I arrived, just as it had been on the day of my termination. But it felt different now. Not the refuge of someone pushed aside, but the home of someone who had stood her ground and prevailed. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it out to my garden, where the late flowers were still blooming despite the cooling weather. Tomorrow, I would need to prepare them for the coming frost, but tonight, I could simply enjoy their resilience. My phone buzzed with a news alert. I checked it and smiled. Granite Forge's stock had climbed 12% following the announcement of Crucible 3. Was successful implementation. The accompanying article mentioned my name prominently as the system's original architect and patent holder now returned to guide the company's technical strategy. From my garden bench, I could see into my garage workshop where Crucible had been born. The lights were off now. The space no longer a sanctuary for secret work, but simply another part of my home. I no longer needed to work in the shadows, proving my value through hidden innovations. I sipped my tea and watched as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Crucible would live on, evolving, but always carrying the core of what I'd created. I would continue my work, now with the recognition and compensation it deserved. And Tyler would move on to his next venture, perhaps a little wiser for the experience. Crucible would live, I would live well. And Tyler would live the rest of his life with a lesson he would never be able to teach in a PowerPoint. Sometimes, the old ways are the best ways. And sometimes, the old-fashioned engineer holds all the patents. Life has a way of sorting these things out, eventually. All you need is patience, preparation, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you've built and exactly what it's worth.